Yeah. All right, welcome to the December 12th, 2016 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight we have 7 items on our agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to each agenda item, and if you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it into the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of the item. Once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be accepted. Sudi, is there any public comment items for item number 1?
No, sir, there is not.
Okay, if you'll call that item then.
Should we move to item 2?
Is Ken not here? Yeah, we can
He's
do
not
that.
here yet, yeah.
Is there any public comment card? Any public comments for item number 2?
No, sir.
I'm going to need Ken for number 2 also.
Okay, well, here's
Okay.
Ken, so we'll do number
Oh,
1.
all right, here we go. We
Breach and
have
security.
You're up, Ken. Discussion, so
We have-
if you want to call the item.
discussion regarding intergovernmental agreement between Forsyth County and the City of Milton for the provision of fire rescue and police services to certain property located within Forsyth County. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's always nice to come, and the first thing that I talk about is an item for which I have to announce that I have a conflict. That's always pleasant, but I don't have a conflict to the extent it's been waived, but I do represent Forsyth County, and obviously I represent the city of Milton. This has been something we've been working on for a while, and I'm now ready to bring it to you. Both the county, Forsyth, and the city have waived the conflict previously. This is an intergovernmental agreement that is in the form more of a permission, and let me explain what this is about. These are somewhat customary when you have pieces of property that lie sort of on the border between 2 different jurisdictions, for one jurisdiction to provide municipalized or governmental services within another jurisdiction. The host jurisdiction, if you will, has to provide permission. In this situation, the host jurisdiction would be Forsyth County. This is a subdivision called, I think it's the Cottages in the Manor, I think is the name of the subdivision. And the idea behind this intergovernmental agreement is that the primary vehicular access, and by the way, if you look into your agenda packet in the back of the contract, you will see a little bit of a map of the subdivision, and you'll see, I hope you can see this, that Watson's Bend Road is the primary vehicular access with respect to this subdivision. And so the moving force behind this intergovernmental agreement is that from a public safety perspective, the jurisdiction that is best equipped to handle, particularly from a first responder situation, emergency calls to this subdivision would be actually the city of Milton. And so to do that, both the City of Milton and Forsyth County need to agree that that would be the case. Forsyth County has already provided its preliminary approval to this intergovernmental agreement. The City of Milton, that's what is in front of you this evening. The moving parts behind this intergovernmental agreement is that it's mainly permission. It is mainly one jurisdiction providing another jurisdiction. Yes, you have the right to provide this service within our jurisdictional boundaries. It is limited to police and fire rescue, basically first responders. The intergovernmental agreement anticipates that the City of Milton would provide first responder apparatus and equipment and manpower to this subdivision in the event of an emergency situation. After the IGA is in place, emergency personnel at both jurisdictions would coordinate with 911 to make sure they understand who gets called first, if you will, in the event of an emergency situation. Nothing within the IGA would take away from the ability of the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office to be able to conduct, obviously, any sort of law enforcement service within the subdivision. It will continue to be, of course, in Forsyth County. This is not an intergovernmental agreement that anticipates the payment of compensation. It would simply be providing the municipalized service in Forsyth County in whatever form that would take. Mainly this is done for efficiency. I think both the law enforcement folks here in the City of Milton and my first responders in Forsyth County just knew that the City of Milton can respond quicker just because of where it's located. Liability would be with respect to each jurisdiction. In other words, if the City of Milton comes in and performs first responder or emergency services in this jurisdiction and gets sued, the City of Milton's insurance would provide indemnity. If Forsyth County is doing the same thing, Forsyth County would provide indemnity for its personnel. So there'd be a clear line of demarcation. It is a lengthy intergovernmental agreement. I believe it's 50 years, which is what the intergovernmental agreement constitutional provision allows under Georgia law. And that's the nuts and bolts of it, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions for Ken? I have a question, Ken, you know, and as a contractor, there's not a monetary payment in there. I guess the obvious is it's the right thing to do to keep citizens safe, whether they're our neighbors or ours. Is that fairly typical?
It is, and in fact, you know, this is one of those ones that is driven by your public safety personnel. It's not driven by lawyers, and it's not even really driven by developers. It's driven by public safety personnel who see this is clearly something where an intergovernmental agreement makes sense. So yes, that's what's driving it at the heart.
And I guess you know, a lot of things ebb and flow and balance, but you know, would it be safe to say that, you know, at some point maybe we have the same situation where another one of our neighbors may pick up a, you know, small part of the neighborhood or whatever, or?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess my question is, would it even be to not approve this? Would that be, you know, be a bad thing?
Well, it would be unusual. I mean, you see these all the time, mutual aid agreements that are put in place. That's really what this is basically. This is a mutual aid agreement where in advance of an emergency, one jurisdiction is basically saying to the other, we're in a better position to protect the citizens of this jurisdiction. Can we do that? The other jurisdiction is simply saying yes. That happens all the time.
Okay. And Steve, just on the police side, and obviously Chief's here, you guys agree with all that?
It shouldn't be an issue. It's I don't see it as a high needs area, and we respond once we take care of whatever the initial issue is. It gets turned over to Forsyth anyway.
Okay, just emergency. Okay, Matt?
And I guess the only question is if anything can go wrong, possibly, I mean, what could go wrong in a situation like this?
The liability equation is probably the largest thing that could go wrong. And candidly, if it became a situation where the costs of servicing began to become extensive, then that may be something the City of Milton would want to reconsider, and you would have the right to terminate upon 30 days' notice.
Okay.
So you have a lot of weapons in your arsenal should you get uncomfortable with this in the future. If not, if it's a fire and forget, you may not think about it for 20 years.
Okay. Anybody else, Karen?
And there's no way for you to slip in there that we have the right to annex the property into the city of Milton without the Forsyth County attorney finding out?
Yeah, if he drafts that, he'll be not long in either jurisdiction.
You know, I don't think that's a good idea. As soon as they get annexed in from Forsyth County, they'll say, we moved here so to get away from all the development. All right, so no other questions or comments? Thank you. All right, Sudi, do we have any, I think I asked you, do we have any public comment for item number 2?
We do not, sir.
If so, then if you please call that item.
May I
No.
ask you to go to number 3?
Okay.
I'm waiting for Carter to get here, and he's got part of number 2.
No problem. Do we have any public comment on item number 3?
We do not, sir.
Okay. Will you please call that item, Sudi?
And that item is follow-up to discussion of City of Milton Green Space Advisory Board. Ms. Kathy Johnson.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. Get set up for 1 second here. At the November 14th council meeting, I provided the council with my research and recommendations regarding the setting up of the Land Advisory Committee, which will be responsible for advising the council on land acquisition decisions with green space funds. That research included industry best practices and examples of land advisory committees from across the country. Based on those practices as examples, staff has come up with some choices for the council to make and some recommendations for formation of that committee. So tonight I'd like to go over those choices and recommendations and ask the council for both their input and decisions on how the committee will be set up. Because this is a work session tonight, I will take your input and decisions about the committee and put them into a resolution for the council to vote on in January. And right now we're looking at the January 9th City Council meeting to bring that resolution to you for a vote on the committee. After that is done, then we can start working on getting people on the committee and starting the land acquisition process. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I handed out to you and is up on your screens to help guide us through the decision process. The first page is a flow chart to show the process and to keep us on track as to where we are and what decisions need to be made tonight. Each page after that goes into a little detail with some suggestions, staff recommendations, and decision points for council. Before we get to the decision boxes, though, I wanted to see if council would agree to calling the committee the Green Space Advisory Committee, or GAC for short.
GAC. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, as long as we don't call it GAC.
Well, it's GAC. I know, I don't like the GAC so much. Staff believes, though, that this name helps tie the committee to the name of the bond that we've been using since February, the Green Space Bond. And then it's more descriptive than just the Land Advisory Committee.
What if,
Or if you have any other suggestions.
what if we put an M in front of it, like Milton Green Space Advisory Committee?
We could do that.
I don't know if,
Yeah,
that way it takes the,
MGAC. No, or MG.
yeah, well,
Okay.
I don't know if council's
Or
okay
you
with
could
that.
just call it the Milton, the Green Space Advisory Committee Extraordinaire and call it GACE.
Yeah. So,
Dear
well,
me.
Would
I
you
don't have
like
a strong feeling, but I just
uh,
threw out the M if that, would
MGAC?
tie it to Milton and then
Milton. Okay, that's great.
also
That's great. Okay.
Council all right with
We
that?
do that for other committees as well, throw Milton in front of us.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're good.
Yes. Okay.
Gross Green and
Okay. Great.
Yeah, a lot of better.
Western Committee.
Okay. So the first box on the chart, and the first thing we need to do is to determine the role of the committee. There are roles that staff came up with based on best practices and other examples, and in keeping with the unique needs of Milton's Green Space Bond. So I'm going to go through each of the recommendations, and then I will ask you all if there's anything you want to delete, add, modify, or anything you want to do on that. So we're on the role of the MGAC. Key responsibility of the committee, I'm just going to say committee now instead of GAC, of the committee is to facilitate the achievement of the objectives of the bond, to acquire land and land interests for conservation, passive parks, trails, and rural viewshed as set out in the approved criteria and bond language. To work to guarantee the overall success of the Green Space Bond program, to establish land selection policies and procedures and other processes related to property acquisition. So this gives the committee the role of coming up with all of the policies and procedures that they're going to use in the land acquisition decisions for their part. Also to advise council and staff on the program policy and the implementation. To participate in land acquisition selection while allowing for public input. To shape the bond criteria, the factors, and the language, the ballot language, into a usable measure or a checklist that they can use for land acquisition. Because we have our ballot language, we have our criteria, we have our factors, for them to take all that and put that in a way that they can use that. Because that is what they are guided by in the land acquisition decisions. Also, for financial oversight, to work with city staff, to manage program implementation and spending, and to keep track of that public money and adherence, to make sure it adheres to the purposes of the bond. And they would work with staff on the financial oversight. To act as visible proponents and ambassadors of the land program to the community. To also act as liaisons between technical advisors and consultants, council, and staff. And to delegate the actual transition negotiation and design with the landowners to the consultants, partners, and or staff. And this is so to avoid conflict. So the actual, once they decide decide to look into a parcel, and the council, if the council chooses to agree, we purchase that parcel, then it would go to the attorneys and the real estate agents to negotiate the deal. So it's not those individual citizens dealing with the offers and everything with the other citizens. So I wanted to see if there's any comments or...
A question or comment I might have just to think about is having this committee, these same people establish the policies and procedures, but then also about actually out there choosing the land. Would it make better sense to have another party establishing the procedures? And I'm just throwing that out. It may not be a big deal, but it sounds like it might.
Well, I would
Could be a
think that
conflict.
they can work to establish them, but we need to approve them before they become, like we do for every other committee. Because I think we need to have the approval of the final policies and procedures.
And that's, okay, that would go under to advise council on the program policy and implementation and council approval.
you know, I'm fine, I just like I said, I want to make sure.
Policies.
You know, if someone knows they're on the committee and they're making the rules, but then they're also thinking about, you know, properties already that they may want to recommend. And it may not be a big deal.
And these would be very kind of general policies on how they would work, and there are lists of best practices that I could help them with, and staff will help them with on establishing the policies and procedures, and it wouldn't be land specific. I mean, site or parcel specific on the policies.
Okay.
Rather than participate in land acquisition selection, I think it needs to be oversee the land acquisition selection, because I think it's more than just participate in it. They're overseeing. I want to make sure that they're the ones that are really steering the, I mean, we get final approval on the council, but they're the ones that are steering the process.
Okay.
They're overseeing it more so than just participating in it.
Okay.
Because I'm assuming council will not even know what land's coming, they're looking at until they make a decision.
Right, on if they want to recommend
A
that
recommendation.
Right.
parcel, or their
So-
recommendation.
So
right.
really, I don't want the public to be the one that's steering it. I want to make sure that this committee is.
And when I say public input, for that,
Right.
what I mean is if the public has an idea of, you know, I think this would be a great parcel, or I know the landowner is thinking of selling this
Right.
parcel, and they can contact the committee and say, hey, maybe you guys should look at this parcel. At that point,
And I
public
think it's
input.
great to have that, and I think that's a very necessary part of it, but I don't want everybody who wants to sell their property to think that, you know, they're gonna have the equal input as the committee. The committee really needs to be the one to oversee the whole
Right, okay.
process.
Okay, better word, oversee, okay. Any other,
Anybody else? Joe?
or anything that I left out that you'd like to see as a role?
So the questions that I have here, I mean, and in general, I don't have a problem with any of these things. I think we could go over, you know, the language, what, you know, verb did we use, what, you know, nouns we use, that kind of stuff, and we could drill in a little bit closer to get specific. But I'm more, how do I want to say it? So this committee, you know, is going to influence quite a bit of potential spending by the city. And it's, I don't want to say it's beyond what we normally ask committees to do, but this could be a committee that has more control over dollars than any other committee that we have. And I'd probably ask for a little bit of guidance on that if that's correct, because I mean, essentially what we're doing is we're providing $25 million. We've got a skeleton outline of what that $25 million needs to be used for, and we're asking the committee to make decisions related to that use. Parks and Rec controls some budget. I don't think that it gets that high. And so one of the questions that I have, and I was going to direct this at Ken, what's the difference between a committee and a commission? And is this really a commission, or is this a committee?
That's just nomenclature. I mean,
Okay, so there's nothing that we need to worry about in terms of needing to call it one thing versus another?
No.
In terms of
No.
what kind of decision and what kind of financial influence they have?
No, I mean, it's going to be significant. I think you've hit on a good issue. What we call it, whether it's a board or a committee or a commission or a, you know, think of our noun. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be established by the city council. It's going to be subject to the Open Meetings Act. Therefore, It will be transparent, if you will. You do raise a good question, which the council may just want to discuss among itself or ask questions about is what does the deliverable look like to the city council? In other words, after going through all of this, will this then be brought to you with a recommendation that this parcel is our recommendation of what needs to be acquired? And at that point, what is the expectation of council? Is it to say yes, or is it to say no? And will council be comfortable saying no after the amount of work
Right.
that apparently has gone in
Well-
to selecting that particular parcel? Just something to think about.
Well, I hate to worry about things before, you know, we've got reason to worry about things, but in the last 3 or 4 months, we've had plenty of examples where the council was involved in a decision, but it wasn't making a decision. And the council has been in positions where we sort of had to agree with the decision after the fact. And I don't want to get into a situation here where that's the case. So I certainly want to understand how these decisions get made and who actually has the power to approve those.
And well, I can answer that question, reading between the lines of that ever so subtle
Yes.
lead-in. But that is an entirely different sort of matter. I mean, there is no question the council is vested with almost absolute discretion with respect to land acquisition for public purposes in the city of Milton, but particularly with city-approved park and rec, GO bond, green space dollars. But that still doesn't mean, though, that there can be a considerable amount of inertia that builds. And so I think the city council will have to view, kind of what is the deliverable, how will it be presented, and will there be input along the way? And again, that's just something for you all to discuss, but just something to keep in mind. But it's totally different than what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
And they will be recommendation. They will come with a recommendation, council. At that point, what we had talked about was having it, and this goes on later, but having it at a council meeting, was open to the public, having public comment for the citizens to have their input at that point and discuss it. And you don't have to, the council would not have to vote that night. They could put it off and take the time to research it and keep putting it off if they want for that recommendation. And then the council, of course, would have the final authority on whether we want that parcel or not, or even to modify the terms, say, you know what, we think that's too much. Can you maybe go back and get a different price for it or something like that? So it's definitely up to the council for the final decision and what the committee would be giving as a recommendation.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily want to focus all the discussion on land acquisition because obviously there's a lot more to this than just land acquisition.
Land interest. When I say land acquisition, that means acquiring interest and acquiring fee simple.
Right.
And acquiring interest in land.
Okay.
So that's a general term that I include.
Right.
All interest, land interest. So any other comments on the role?
Yeah.
I think part of what might make us all give a little bit of pause here is our normal process for acquiring land is mainly secretive with regards to executive session.
It's an issue.
Right. So
And I will. I'm sorry.
So going into that, I'm trying to imagine, as we talk about roles, as someone who would be on this committee, what exactly do they do? Do they go to a landowner, knock on their door physically and say, hey, we love this piece of property. Is this something that you'd be willing to sell? And then do they automatically begin formulating prices or negotiations at that moment when they're door to door talking with a prospective landowner? And then of course now we're talking if they come back into a public forum where everybody's debating this on that end, I could see landowners sitting there and they're lining their pockets thinking, hey, this is going to be great. They can, everybody's going to want it. And
right.
So that I'm just thinking of a, from what we're used to seeing, the question becomes is how much authority would this committee have versus what we're used to doing, and is it right for? And just asking the question, is it right for a committee to be doing this versus us who've been doing this all the time anyway, and the process that we've been using? I don't know. It's just a question. So on the roles of words, I don't have a problem with it on that end. I'm just trying to foresee what that looks like and how public is public. Is maybe the question. You look like you have a.
I'm going to jump in if that's okay. From a procedural standpoint, I think what you'll more likely see are a host of potential acquisitions that would be presented to you as a council in an executive session. Something to probably ones that we may be able to get our hands on, ones that just aren't for sale. If we do any legwork ahead of time, it's obviously going to cause the impact exactly what the exact impact you're talking about. So at some point, I would assume similar to how we do land acquisition now, do the presentation in executive session, do the legal background work we need to do, make our offers based on your approval, and have it out, then have the public presentation on it. Because otherwise, I don't see how you could do it in reverse.
Right.
And I will say, as we go through this, I do talk about what would be done in recommendations for executive session, and the city attorney and I have spoke several months ago about this, on having, if there's a parcel that they recommend, having a contract on it, but there being an out. It's subject to the city council's approval. So if we want out, we want out before it comes before the public. So that protects the city.
And so one thing I want to make sure that we do have, from a clarity perspective, when there's negotiation, for my comfort anyway, obviously with our executive session experience, our city manager is the one working with trying to figure out the price negotiations and things like that. And maybe the rest of the council would, but I would love to see that maintained. Does that make sense? I'm not so sure about a committee trying to negotiate that. I think that should still be within the staff's realm, because that's what we do all the time. Maybe at some point we extend it, but that's just my own thinking.
So this was something else we discussed, in fact, just today. Once we get the approval from council to approach a landowner regarding a potential acquisition, it's at that point we're going to need to either contract with a professional in the industry or something along those lines that's going to be able to do that negotiation on behalf of us. I mean, there are some, without getting into details, obviously we can handle different ways, but I wouldn't envision members of this committee going and negotiating on behalf of the city.
Okay. I just want to make sure that stayed the same. That's just my thinking.
And that is in the materials that we're going to talk about, having separate consultants that will do that, like I said, back and forth transactional,
Right.
the offer and the back and forth, to have a separate person, not the committee member, negotiating. The actual negotiation will be with a consultant,
Okay.
separate from the committee. At least that's the recommendation.
I saw that, and I just want to clarify that.
Rick?
Just so I understand, tonight is the role of this discussion, and we're looking more at the role and how are we going to select, et cetera, not getting into the process, the nuts and bolts of how do we do once we get these people on board, what are the nuts and bolts? I would assume we're going to see that process fleshed out in another work session, but is this more just to get the beginning, what are the qualifications, what are the traits that we want, that type of thing, before we get into how's it going to work?
Right, not policies and procedures yet. That is
Okay.
that is to come after we have a committee, and that would come back before the council. This is how we're going to set it up, and how we're going to choose people, and what type of people you want it, and in what way. Kind of the formation of the committee. Then the policy and procedures will come after that.
Okay.
They have to decide.
I just want to make sure we didn't get too much into the weeds on how we're going to do it. Just make sure we stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish tonight.
Right, and the reason I put the role, just so you have an idea when we talk about how we're going to form this committee and what type of people you want on it, I wanted to define in general the role so we know, what type of people we'll be looking for and how we're going to choose those people.
Okay.
That's why I have the role right now, and it's kind of a broad for right now, and then later we would be more
Then you get
specific.
into the actual process details.
Right.
Okay.
Any other comments on
Anybody
this?
else? Okay.
Okay. So the next slide is the qualifications, traits, and skills on the committee. So again, these are based on these are staff recommendation based on best industry practices and on other committees that I've looked at throughout the country. So people who fully support the program and its conservation goals. That sounds very, of course, but it has to be focused on that. The goals of the committee, you always have to remind yourself of the goals of the committee and people that will support those goals of the bond program. Milton citizens, the recommendation is that the committee made up of all Milton citizens, or there could be additional members with technical expertise. If we can't find citizens that want to be on the committee with a certain expertise or qualification that we're looking for, do we want to open it up to someone, a non-citizen with that expertise or not? And I do get, when we go down here, I talk about technical advisors, whether we want a separate group of technical advisors if we don't get enough of those qualifications on the citizen committee. So that's something to think about when we're talking about the makeup of the committee. And also, for the council to decide if we want to create a list of stakeholders that should be on the committee. People with interest relevant to the goals of the bond. For example, conservation, people, equestrians, park and trail people, certain community groups, or certain stakeholders that we would want to make sure that we get representation on this committee. That's another thought. Specialized knowledge and skills related to the program. Do we want to look for, require, or ask for citizens or committee members to have a real estate background, natural resources, land management, scientists, appraisers, land trusts, grant writers, because we intend to pair this money with grants that we can also use, finance people, surveyors, etc. Or if we can't get those people, we will talk about the possibility of having a technical committee or some technical consultants. Environmentalists are valuable as advisors and watchdogs of the program's goals. Personalities suited to promoting conservation to a broad audience, to the entire citizenry. People who can build credibility with landowners, agencies, and the community. And people with cool heads and good business minds. And then the next page there, people with leadership qualities and good reputations in the community. Possibly members of the campaign committee because they have proven dedication and familiarity with the bond. There were a few people that were on it that formed a campaign committee who were proponents of the bond. So before I get into the number of the committee members, I just wanted to go over some of those and see if there's any additions, deletions, or modifications on any of those qualifications, skills, and traits.
Yes to Milton citizens. In my
All
mind.
Milton citizens?
Yeah, I don't want a non-Milton citizen to have a vote. I don't mind bringing them in for expertise,
Okay.
but I think on the committee it needs to be someone that is within our boundaries,
Okay.
in my mind. So.
How does the rest of the council feel about that?
I would agree. There may be times where, and we found this in other committees and commissions, that there may not be, especially if we do it in district or even the city, sometimes there may be an expertise that folks might not be able to find. So, again, we'd want some kind of avenue to at least get some professional advice.
Exactly.
But I'm fine with, as far as the actual vote, because it is amongst the citizen who keep
Okay.
it at home.
It's their taxpayer,
Yeah.
taxpayer dollars.
I was gonna say the only qualification that they needed to vote was to be a citizen of the city, okay? And they had an opinion going into the booth, whether they wanted to support it or they wanted to vote against it. I don't think that has, because we keep using the language supported the bond. Now that the bond has been passed, all citizens should be allowed to participate regardless of what their original thoughts were. And the responsibility of putting somebody on this committee should rest with the council in terms of making decisions and nominations for people to participate. And then the council will debate whether or not that individual makes sense or not. But I think the only qualification we need is they need to be a citizen of the city, as Matt said.
So if these are, like I said, these are best practices on skills and qualifications that you might help in
I
the
get
decision
that.
process,
I
not
get that.
who supports the bond,
I get that.
the goals. Okay,
The,
most important.
okay, so there's gonna be a limited number of people on the committee, all right? The council's gonna make the nominations for who we appoint, okay? It's gonna be our job to figure out who it is that we need to get on the committee. And it's gonna be the council's job to agree with our nominations or not. And so, if they have a skill set, I mean, it's in our best interest to pick people that have the right skill set to be on the committee. But I'm not gonna use that as a criteria.
Well, I think one of the things she's suggesting is that we don't all nominate one person, that
Right.
they
Yes,
give
and
us
I'm
a
getting to
slate
that.
and then we approve that slate
Right.
based on staff, having reviewed all the people, so it's not,
And that's right.
Yeah.
That's one
That's
choice.
where this
That's-
would
That's
come
the
in.
choice we have to make.
That's
though.
a choice we have to make.
That's a
have to
choice
make.
that's coming up very
And
soon.
if you do
Right.
that, then you don't have to have 7. You may have 5. If you have 5 really qualified people, then,
Right.
or
And
9
that's-
really qualified people. It's not,
Right.
you know.
And that's where this would come more into effect if it was open for applications rather than it was appointed per person. So this goes more to that decision on how they're going to be appointed.
I mean, I like the idea of reaching out to everybody in the community and
who's
asking
interested.
who has a real strong
Right.
interest in doing this. I mean, who has got a passion for it and who has got the professional skills and training to carry this out. Because they're going to be tasked with $25 million to spend. I mean, that's, or hopefully more than that with grants. So we need to make sure we got some people that are not looking after their own interests, but looking after the interest of Milton, that have the professional expertise to do this, and also can, to be honest with you, understand confidentiality, because there's going to be a lot of confidential stuff they're going to be talking about.
Right. Okay, well then why don't we just, the next thing I had was number of the committee members. Why don't we just skip then to deciding how they would be chosen, and that way some of these other things will come into play more so depending on that decision. So the 2 ways that this can be done is either committee members are chosen from the Milton community as a whole. So that is staff's recommendation and also best practices. It ensures that the committee members represent the whole community's best interests rather than a specific geographic area.
And how do you do that?
Yeah, let's explain that.
Yeah, that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
Explain that.
instead of, the other option is to do it by district, which is normally the way the council, everybody in each district, every council person appoints a member for a committee. Okay, that's normally how you do it. You each represent a district. So it would be a person from each district in Milton that would be then on the committee. So this is a different option. Now, this is looking at the community as a whole, everybody in the community, and picking from there instead of it being a choice of each councilman, from each council
just
member
think
from each district.
I think you have to be careful, though. Part of the reason you typically pull from districts or choose from districts is to spread it out, so we're not being represented just by one particular area. So I think, in that case, you have to be very careful that at least the pool of folks will spread from different areas of the city.
And that's where, when I talk about the qualifications and traits, they're chosen more for their skills and qualifications than exactly where they live in the district. So you have this whole pool of people from the community, and depending on what background they have and what skills they have, then you go from there and you pick the candidates from there instead of they have to be living in that district. Because also the bond criteria does not state that there has to be a land interest or a parcel in each district. That was brought up at one of the meetings of the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission and the other members of the public decided against that because they wanted it as a community as a whole. So the geographic representation may not make as much sense in this situation because it's not going to be everybody from a district that could possibly have a land acquisition parcel.
I guess I'd add to what the mayor said. I think I like the concept of drawing from the whole community and see who's interested. Put the word out and have people really come forward, understand what the qualifications are, and then see who comes forward. But I would ask that if we go this route, then you take a good look at, if you've got people that are pretty close from a skill standpoint, the more we can actually get representation from around the city versus, so I'd ask in the evaluation process, you look at when you're choosing, if you've got people that are pretty close, don't make sure they're not all coming from the same area. So I know we've had, that was the whole reason why we did have districts, so that if you're Highway 9 or another area, you don't get left behind. You actually have a voice because it's going to be your tax dollars too.
And that can be looked at if you do the applications with their address
Right.
and then put on there what district, so they're not all from District 2 or all
Correct.
or majority from all
Yeah,
from
that
one
would be
district
my
that
only
would be
comment,
done.
is make sure we're looking at that when you get down to the vetting process.
Mm-hmm.
If we can spread it out and still have some balance, I think that's a good way to go.
Okay, okay.
Fran, did you have some?
Yeah.
The other benefits of doing this way is it allows for a larger
something,
pool
John?
of
Keep going, keep going.
is it allows for a larger pool of qualified candidates to be chosen for council. You know, if there's three people in the same district that have very, very good qualifications, or two people in the same district, but you can't pick both of them, you know, that limits the qualifications and traits that would be available for the committee.
And it may be that we want to end up with like 9 on the committee, with 7 being from districts and 2 of them at large, to make
Right.
sure that we get the most qualified people. Because I think getting the most qualified people is
That's
a
key.
key.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that we end up going with 9 rather than 7, because we want to make sure we have people that
Right.
that are really qualified that can be on the committee.
And that number is something that you all can come up with too. How many people do you want on the committee? I just recommend an odd number, obviously, for voting purposes.
I think on that, though, you have to be careful. Too many,
Right.
Yeah.
it'll make it, you know.
Too difficult to.
I will tell you.
Probably somewhere between 5 and 7 would probably
Mhm.
be a reasonable number. That's just my guess.
And in all of the research I did on committees throughout the country, that the number ranged from anywhere from 3 to 13. That was the number range, and in between. And some of the communities I looked at were very big communities as well, like Jacksonville, Florida.
I think 3 is too small, and 11 or 13 is too big. So I would say 5, 7, or 9 is what it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. And if you did the community-wide, choosing it in that way, then you could do a call for applications. That's my that's the next slide. So what you would do if you went there, you would call for applications from the community, and then anybody that was interested in the community, and people that could also be nominated. So if there's a council member that knows of a specific person, they could ask that person, hey, why don't you apply? Or someone else can say, this person has the qualifications, this would be a great person to be on the committee. Then there would be a call for applications, and then a screening of applications from there. And if you were to go that route, would it be staff screening applications? Would it be council screening the applications to come up with a slate of candidates? Or would it be a separate nominating committee that would come up with a slate of candidates for then the council to vote on? So I guess at this point, I just want to see if you all have what are your thoughts on if you want to do it by district, by community-wide, or a combination of, like Councilmember Thurman suggested?
Yeah.
So the way we do it now is council makes a selection, we bring it forth, and we rattle off a list of accomplishments for the reason why we think it's important. We ask for a vote from that perspective. We don't necessarily interview that applicant up here. We just sort of listen to the council, and we make a decision based on our knowledge or trust or things of that nature. What I do think is that we might, as a council, should do a better job of screening ourselves. I think just to keep it geographic as well as responsible, because ultimately we are, as Councilmember Longoria said, that we are ultimately responsible for this. I would see that we can do that, but if we did a better job of maybe holding a hearing of each applicant as well, that might get us to some place where we can have a better idea. The other alternative you're saying is that the staff is making a recommendation of qualified individuals. And
Well, to screen, right?
Yeah.
well, it is making a selection of qualified individuals. Yeah, you're doing that screen. And so on that end, if we get some people that are coming in, there's no guarantee of what geographic area they may be in. While they maybe have an interest from that perspective, there is I can see some conflict going in there between the two bodies, being council or being this committee, because they're not necessarily beholden on anything with regards to our wishes about our representation to our district. on that end, and there's some decency in that process of the struggles we face as we talk about doing things in our different districts and where we allocate our resources, right? We do that already here. In fact, I had someone in my district, mad at me because I went to go see the plans going on in Crabapple at one point, and just stuff like that. It goes on. So it's just as we represent our district, I think it's our job to do that. I don't want to see our job being taken away from us, especially in something that's so important. I just have a hesitation on that. So,
Joe?
Yeah, I would, we could spend all night talking about this particular part of the thing, and obviously there's real work that needs to be done, but there are 3 districts. Each district has 2 representatives. I think it's gonna be difficult for me, I won't talk for anybody else, to buy into a process where I don't have a voice in a nomination for who gets on the committee, right? But I also could tell you that I think I could work with Rick, who's the other person from my district who was elected, to select somebody who's both from our district and another person for our district that didn't necessarily have to live in the district, so we could blend those 2 things together. So 3 people could be at large, 1 person could be from the district, or 3 people could be from the district, and the mayor would have a person that they appoint as well, if we're trying to drive to the 7 number, for example. But I think there's some ways that we can blend that together. I don't think it needs to be all one or all the other. So
Right, yes, it could be district representation and some at large.
right.
I'm just gonna say, this is gonna be one of the toughest parts of this. Because, there's gonna be, concerns from the community on who chooses what. There's gonna be concerns on the council. To me, this is one where it'd be really nice, I don't know the answer to this, but, if professionally, if we went with the slate, that slate was chosen of the best people, and there was no conflicts or whatever. But I'm just saying, however we do it, there's going to be a lot of, everybody's going to be concerned about conflicts.
Yeah, I agree with you. This isn't a political appointment. This is too important for something like that. This needs to be the absolutely best qualified people in the city. And if staff is doing the pre-screening and they can, know where people are coming from, maybe they have a slate of 9 and we have to choose 5 or 7 or whatever out of it. But I really think we want to make sure we have the best people on the committee.
Well, to that point, if we could take the politics out of it, not saying, but just in general with elected people and obviously our citizens' representation, I wonder if there's some blend where, from a professional point, the resume, so to speak, could be called through and recommendations, but to maybe Karen's point, maybe there are recommendations for more, and then the council individually or as a whole could kind of cull through and, if there's 13 choices and, if there's some that the whole council likes, yes, keep them. If there's some that, the council doesn't really necessarily like, kind of weed it down that way.
Instead of having a slate, do you mean just give
Well,
the council
or
all
a
the
slate, do a
applications?
larger slate, knowing that there's more, 3 or 4 more than you would have, but then cull through with the council, okay, does everybody agree on this person? If they all do, yes. If this person, only 2 people agree and 5 people don't agree,
By
maybe put them in
majority.
a different, Matt and then Rick.
Best is subjective, regardless of who you are. And I think that you need to have I agree with the idea of having a staff screening. Whenever we vote for anything else, we do have a staff recommendation for a vote on this. And I would agree that it needs to be very important. That doesn't mean that we can't make a good selection in our districts. So perhaps as a council, if we were to make appointees, or if you have an application that comes in who becomes a council appointee, there is a screening process that goes in with a staff recommendation of approval or denial based on an individual. I mean, that could happen too. We do that for everything else. We're essentially doing that as well. But I think the geographic needs to be included. It's just my
But even
opinion. So I have
if
no
our
problem
staff's
with
working
staff
to bring
screening.
something forward, they can keep the geographic.
Yeah, and if
part of it.
someone comes through the process where staff asks for volunteer help and someone submits it and they happen to be in a district or whatever, it comes to a point where, that council member would have to decide if that may be their selected appointee. I'm just trying to think how that would work out.
I disagree. As far as, I do think we need representation from all the districts, but if these people are truly professionals, they're gonna represent the whole area, just like we are supposed to represent the area. We don't represent our district. We're voted on at large for a reason, and that was because we wanted to make sure that everybody was, all of us that were elected represented all of the city. When we did the charter, we put a lot of thought into that. And so I really think that, we got to get the best people, qualified people, and I don't think best is subjective. I think in this case, we may make some mistakes, but there's a big difference in professional qualifications and everything. And I think the application, if we put one out there, needs to be very specific as far as what your professional qualifications are, leadership abilities, and all that kind of stuff, so that we can make a decision that's not just subjective.
Rick?
I guess I'm thinking the same way, but I think we still need to look and make sure, if you can look at the districts where you're drawn from, but then have the application so it's actually pulling out what we want to see. But then I would foresee that you also would be talking to the person. You wouldn't just be looking at a piece of paper. You'd interview people. But I think the idea of actually going out to the community at large, we've got a better chance of actually finding out what interest is out there and finding qualified candidates. But then ultimate approval is going to be by council, correct?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And if you would prefer, depending on how many applications we might get, I don't know, we're going to get 50 applications. I mean, we might only get 10 applications, and if the council then wanted to look at all of them, and the staff doesn't do any screening, and instead the council does screening, that's an option as well.
Another thing that we might want to throw in there, I mean, you throw out and get applications, interest, but, each council member may have someone they want to recommend, and go out to someone and ask them, and you can put them in the pool
which we
too.
can do that too.
Just so that we're
Yeah, I
not,
think we ought to be able to nominate
But-
somebody, but then it ought to be
But
open to
based on
anyone
the
who wants to
process.
apply also.
Right.
And that would be allowed under, as I said, the application process. People can nominate people.
Right.
Even the council, I think, go and talk
Right.
to someone, hey,
right.
why don't you apply for
If
this?
somebody you think would represent, go ahead. Before Joe, do you want to weigh in, Bert?
No.
Okay. Joe, go ahead.
So, we're all elected at large by the entire city, but we have to come from a specific district. I think we're saying all the same thing, but we're going about it a different way. I'm stating that I think individuals need to come from a specific district, because it's a responsibility to make sure that we have a diversity of opinion in these kinds of matters. Now, we have to vote on, as a council, who gets on the committee and who doesn't. I sort of have a problem electing a slate, because that sort of takes some of the choice away. I could be convinced that maybe it's the best method, but somebody'd have to come up with a lot of compelling reasons why that would make sense. But I think that it's going to be hard for us to get away from at least half of the committee being somebody that we nominate from our district.
Let me say something. The one thing that's nice is only having 3 districts. It's pretty easy to be covered. The other thing, and I have an issue with just voting on a slate too, and I think we all share some of the overall concerns. There could be a blend. Number one, you could look at all the applicants and the people and the recommendations, and come up with a slate, but make it a larger slate. And again, then you'd have to look at, okay, these people, in the best of our judgment, represent the best and should be the people on there. If you realize that, hey, it's lighted way too much for District 1 and nobody in District 3, then maybe you go back and adjust and find someone in District 3. But you may look at it and you may have all qualified people. And it's like, you know what? This pretty much balances out.
Right.
The other thing that you might have kind of a combination, if you bring us a slate, or staff brings us a slate, but let's say has 2/3, 50% more than the number we actually want on there, then you can call it down by, you take individual, if everybody on the council approves so-and-so, that's a pretty good bet. If you get to so-and-so and, only 2 people approve and the others don't, then you put them on the back burner and go through. And I think you could narrow that slate that we're, kind of arm's length from, but then you could narrow it down to where we're all kind of bought into. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, if everybody just shows out of a slate of
15
15,
maybe.
there's 7 top candidates, then you can see which ones,
Then it's a
who
combo.
got the most votes.
Then you got professionals, arm's length, making hopefully,
Recommendation.
professional recommendations, but then you also got the council and the elected, making recommendations, and then you find out what ends up coming out, the top picks. Does that make sense? Bert?
I'm sorry if you may have already stated this. I see in here 3 to 13 members is what the case studies show. What are you, or have you got a target? I heard Karen say 7. Is that?
That was up to you. I think 3's, personally, I think 3's too little and 13's too much.
You got you. So
For
somewhere
our
in the
community.
middle there.
I
Yeah,
said
some of
5,
them-
7, or 9.
And I agree too that with us having 3 districts, we at least ought to have one person from each district, and
Right.
maybe each district and post could get together and come up with that, and then let the others, fall where they may, however we decide.
Yeah, my only point was, my personal opinion is 9 may be getting to where it's a little bit too big. You get too many people. Number one, it's hard for them to come to a decision. Number two, what happens is if there's a lot of people, some people pick up the work and some people kind of, go off and don't show up to meetings versus if you have a smaller group, everybody's got to be active in it. So, my guess would be, I wouldn't personally think it needs to be more than 7. I'd even go as low as 5 and no more than 7, but that's my opinion. Does everybody like the idea? And really, maybe we don't have to pick the exact number, but maybe bringing us a large slate of qualified people, and then you can kind of work through as, see who are unanimous, whatnot, and work down and see what you get. And then again, council could still, if it ends up being 9 favorites, that makes sense, maybe it's 9. If there's only 5, maybe it's 5. It just depends. 7, whatever.
And
I don't
that-
know that we have to decide right now, do we, on the number?
No, you do not have to, right. And that might give you the most flexibility as well. You'll
Yeah,
see,
you may say-
we got district, we got this
We said
person, this
5, but
district.
then, got 7 great people that, maybe vice versa.
Right, right, and also at this point, I have no idea how many applications we will
Right.
get.
I do think it's important to have a standard application
Right.
that we can send to people that we may nominate or whatever, so that we're comparing everybody on the same, based on the same criteria.
And that was why I was talking about before with the traits and qualifications
Right.
that you'd be looking for. It doesn't mean that everybody has to have every one of those or even
Right.
one. There might be people that are, and some of them are people with reputations in the community, people that interact well with landowners. So some of them are not, some of the qualifications that I mentioned are not specific to land management or real estate, general people that in the community, that are known in the community and can work well with people.
But I think if we have like a slate type thing, it makes sure that you don't have somebody appointed that may be appointed by one particular person and may not blend in well with the whole group. If you're doing it by a slate, I think you're more likely to get a group together that will,
Yeah, a good qualified group.
yeah.
And I will tell you, just to note, I've had, to date, I've had approximately 5 people come to me and say they were interested on being on the committee thus far. That's without putting any call for applications or anything like that out there, just to give you an idea.
The one
Right
thing, we need to keep in mind I'm gonna assume there's gonna be if we advertise, there's gonna be a lot of folks interested, which is great. But that also means there's a lot of people that won't be on the committee, so, we'll have to be delicate on that. There's a lot of times we have, in some cases, a lot more volunteers than we have spots for, so, we need to be prepared for that. Also, I think it would be important that each council member also, if they have someone they think would be qualified and a good pick, to, be proactive and talk to that person and put their name in the hat at least, rather than just whoever, the only ones that, apply, versus if you have somebody that you really think would be good, I would recommend that they're put in the mix too.
Right, yes.
Bert?
And you plan on having an application versus just
Well,
to
that's
throw
what
the
I'm
name?
asking you all.
Okay,
I
yeah.
would say yes.
Yeah,
Yes, application.
I think so that way we can judge everybody based on the same.
You know, maybe an application where you've got, say, 10 questions that you,
Right.
and, you know, based on their, you know, occupations and interests and
Professional
professional.
certifications or
you know,
whatever else
you
they
know,
might have.
Professional
that-
abilities that, you know, could weigh one way or the other.
Okay.
But again, like I said, this will be one of the harder decisions or harder groups to pick.
And one of the reasons why some of the best practices talk about it being from the community as a whole is for political reasons. So it doesn't look like the committee is appointed that it's political, because we're of course asking the people to pay extra taxes for this. So that was a reasoning behind why it was recommended that it be from the community as a whole, to avoid any conflicts of interest or any political appointee stuff. So a combination of that might work. So it looks like the council is doing something different here and really looking at the qualifications. And
I have no
that's
problem
something
doing
that
something
we-
different, I just wanna make sure that every single area is represented. So
Yeah.
that's important to me, you know,
And that
We've
could be
got
part of
plenty of committees that all function very, very well, and they've used a particular process to get appointees on those committees. So let's not confuse a process with somehow selecting better committees. We don't want to go down that road, all right? What we're exploring are options to how to get people on a committee. That's really all we're doing, and we're discussing those options.
But also, we want the best qualified people on the committee.
No other committee that we have has $25 million
Not
to
financially
to
Right.
spend.
Well,
so-
okay, I brought that up earlier. I just don't want to, never mind.
Okay. All right, well, I think you kind of, you know, get the direction from the council on.
Okay. Okay.
Okay?
And just on when those applicants are screened and when you all talk about that, 'cause in here I talk about an executive session and to protect people's privacy
Right.
when you're voted on the slate and on the applications and all that, just
Yep.
to let you know that. Okay?
Right, and typically, we could go into executive session and discuss the person, individuals or as a whole. And then we'd come out and publicly vote on it, but you wouldn't have the open discussion in the public, so just to protect people's,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Oh, I did want to go over one thing. If, after you choose the committee members, if it looks like that we don't have enough people with certain expertise or qualifications, there is a recommended option through best practices to have a separate, I hate to use the word committee, group of people that you can call on that have expertise in certain areas, whether it be grant writing or whether it be land management or, for example, a land trust or something like that. That they might not necessarily want to be on the committee, but they'll be open to staff or the committee contacting them for technical expertise and guidance. And that helps with if you don't get all the qualifications that you want on the committee. That can always be an option as well.
Okay.
Is that something that depends on
You know,
me again,
again,
I
I-
guess. Depends on
Depends what we
A
end
Yeah.
lot of it, you know,
Right.
it's hard to sit here and make the exact decision when you don't know what your candidates are gonna look like.
right.
And again, I agree where we wanna, you know, districts will be represented from all over the city, but I also think we need to see what our strengths are. And, you know, if all of our candidates, the strengths is maybe a little, not quite exactly spread out, you know, we still might wanna consider it if those are the best people on there. Now, granted, if, you know, we look at it and everybody's, you know, from one district or whatever, then we'd wanna look at it, so. but-
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a representation, not necessarily district, but from all parts of the
I mean,
city.
the
'Cause
good news-
districts, sometimes you go down a road and it's one district on one side, one district on the other side. It really doesn't matter where that person lives, to be honest with you, if they're, you know.
Yeah. I think the goal is just to have the best qualified, but also people that, obviously, if they're on there, they need to truly care about the city and do the right thing. And hopefully, we can get it evenly spread across the city too, from where they live.
And they will also, whoever it will be constrained and guided by the criteria in the bond language.
Exactly, and then, you know, all decisions will still be public and come before all of us, so.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, we will come up with a resolution that makes it flexible for how the committee is chosen then. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Okay, Sudi, let's see, you want to go back to what, did we, number 2, was it? Number 2 that we
Keep
skipped?
rolling that one down.
Okay. All right, so we are on 4. Do we have any public comment, Sudi, for item number 4?
No, we don't, sir.
Would you please read that item?
Discussion of RZ 1607 to amend the AG1 agricultural district regarding paved and unpaved roads in Chapter 64, Article 6, Division 2, and Section 64416, Development Standards. I do have a late card that came in from Miss Laura Bentley.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Laura Bentley, 2500 Bethany Church Road. Thanks for this opportunity to pass along my thoughts. First of all, I wanted to say thank you. I'm not sure who the responsible party is, but the packets are very much more helpful now. They're coming out in advance. The hyperlink to the actual, from the agenda item to the information is very helpful when there's 500 pages. Also, the executive summaries are, I think, should be very helpful to you because it follows the item all the way through the process and gives you a good read on what the public comment has been to that point. So thank you, whoever is doing that. With regard to the gravel roads, this text amendment has history. It started with Sweet Apple and the issues with the yield. We then went to Nix, and we have a some 1 acre lots off of a adjacent gravel road. Then we have Wood Road, and then finally we have Hopewell. So a loophole has been discovered which has resulted in unintended consequences, 1 acre lots on our gravel roads. And we all know that this loophole needs to be resolved so that council's intent can be deliberately executed by staff when it comes to the subdivision of parcels adjacent to our gravel roads. I also wanted to just bring out some possible inconsistencies between the gravel road map and the list that's included in the packet. Perhaps there might be some roads that are considered private that might be public, like Day. I don't know this for sure. I'm just saying it might require a little bit extra look. Providence Way, and then of course Cowart was considered a paved road, and some of it is unpaved. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more public comments, Sudi?
That's all, sir.
Okay. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The Community Development Department recommends approval of this proposed text amendment. By way of background, the purpose of this text amendment is to amend the existing ordinance to ensure that any parcel fronting on an unpaved road, a gravel road, remains 3 acres in size. This also includes those parcels that have frontage on both an unpaved road and a paved road, no matter what the width of the frontage on the unpaved road. This item was presented at the October 26th Planning Commission meeting. After deliberation and consideration of comments from the public, the proposed text amendment was deferred to allow staff to provide the following information, which was a list of unpaved roads in Milton and a list of parcels and their sizes that have frontages on both unpaved roads and paved roads that are not already in platted subdivisions like White Columns. At the September 16th Planning Commission meeting, the staff provided the items that the Planning Commission requested from the October meeting, and after further discussion by the Planning Commission, they recommended approval 6-0 of the amendment as proposed by staff. So you do have in your packet the list of the unpaved roads as well as the parcel ID numbers and the acreages of the parcels that front on those unpaved roads or paved and unpaved roads. as well as a map that is also in here. And I will tell you that staff has found some inconsistencies between the map and the listing of the unpaved roads, and we are working to correct that, and you'll have a corrected version in your packet by Thursday in anticipation of next week's meeting.
Okay. Any questions or comments, Kathy?
I have one just
Matt?
general question. So, frontage is by definition just the front of a subdivision, is that right? Or does that include the sides as well?
Any frontage on a, which could be, if it fronts or sides on an unpaved road or
So the side of a
paved road.
subdivision as well is also considered, so if the boundary, anywhere in that boundary of a plot of land, if any of that is on a gravel road, then we're talking about this being in effect, is that right? So, like for example, so we talk about, say you have 5 or 50 acres and half of the front of that is gravel, the other half is paved. That's, for me, I'm thinking frontage in my own mind, or is that all of it gravel and then the side of it may be paved? Is that what we're talking about here?
I think what he's saying is the frontage, we think of as being just the front part of the lot, and we want to make sure
It's
the
the whole
frontage
parcel.
means if any part of the lot touches the gravel road,
any
then
boundary.
it's,
It's the whole 50 acres.
is that what you're
Any
saying?
any boundary.
Any
around-
boundary.
Any boundaries of the whole
Okay.
50 acres.
So
okay?
that's- so,
Is that-
okay.
I think that would clarify.
Think of it along the lines of adjacency.
Adjacent, perfect. It's just
Yes.
making sure I saw it in the, so just to clarify that. So,
And what to that point, what if they cut the parcel in half? If it's, adjacent on a paved road on one side and gravel on the other?
We wouldn't allow it. I mean, the thing is, it's 3 acres. If it touches an unpaved road, we're creating a subdivision with a minimum of 3 acres.
But my question is, let's say somebody, just for instance, owned 50 acres, and one side of it was on a gravel road, and they wanted to split it, and sell 25 acres, 25 acres, and split 25 acres off.
Right.
And then later, somebody came in, or they did that right before then, they wanted to have an application to develop on the 25 acres that's on the paved road.
Yeah, I understand your scenario. Maybe we should let the city attorney weigh in. He can give you the official legal response.
There you go.
Well, yeah. What's that now?
So, I'm sorry, he may not have the advantage of the wording, is that, so like, if you had 50 acres and it fronted on both gravel and ungravel, and you're saying, well, they wanna cut it in half and do the portion that's on the frontage, well, they can't do that, because on the page 1, in the middle, it says, in the red, it says, under parentheses 3 acres when a parcel at the time of the adoption of this ordinance has frontage on both a paved road and an unpaved road, regardless of the width of the gravel road frontage. Meaning that whatever date, December 19th, at that point, that parcel, if it touches
I got you.
a gravel road, it has to be 3 acres and it's in all its entirety.
In its entirety.
Okay. Joe?
We don't have to go back very far to come up with a concrete example that needs explanation, all right? We've got 3 parcels. One's about 45 acres, one's about 12 acres, and another one's 21 acres or something like that. The one that's on the left-hand side or the right-hand side touches a gravel road, all right? If it was left a parcel all by itself, the only road that it has access to is this gravel road. So if they develop that, it's gotta be 3 acre minimums. If you combine all those parcels together, the other 2 have access to a non-gravel road, okay? You're saying, well, hold it, let's do it in reverse. If that was all one lot, and it got subdivided into 3 parcels the way it exists today, the one that has no connection to the gravel road, because it was connected on this date, would all of a sudden be grandfathered in? Is that what you're saying?
Right, that's the way it's written at this point. That's what,
So some future landowner, through no fault of his own, is gonna have to be told why he can't develop his property at the 1 acre level, even though his property does not touch the gravel road. That's what we're saying?
Right, and this is what was recommended by,
I don't know if I'm following you 100% on
You're
that,
right,
though.
you're right.
If,
I'm following him.
I get,
No,
If they-
I don't know
As
what
of-
grandfathering has to do with anything.
as of
It's not-
December 19th,
right. It's not
if it's one
grandfathered.
parcel, and then if it's split up later, it would just be known that it's 3-acre minimum. So I don't think you're going back and telling anybody, are you?
so,
right, yeah,
No.
so I
They
mean,
wouldn't
if-
already know.
Anybody anyway.
No, the-
No, you're
No,
not.
it's not grandfathering. The point is, it's almost the equivalent of someone is taking basically a snapshot of the city the very date that you adopt this code. You take a snapshot, and if that parcel, this parcel has this dual frontages, then even if there's a future subdivision.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. If a parcel touches a gravel road, it should be subject to the 3-acre minimum. I'm concerned about the parcel that doesn't touch a 3-acre road.
In
being
some future
subject-
time. Right.
Yeah, a gravel road. I think I said 3-acre road.
I understood what you meant.
Getting excited. Okay.
Bert and Rick?
All right, I think I understand where you're coming from, but let's take it to another real-time example now that I think the way it is. The Freemanville and Nix subdivision. It's, if I understand it correctly, it's got a new road that's perpendicular to Freemanville Road that's cut in, going, I guess it's west, if Freemanville runs north and south. Parallel to this new road is Nix Road. There are 3 or 4 lots that have frontage or adjacent to this new paved road and this existing gravel road. You're saying if that parcel was one parcel and it hadn't been developed yet, that whole subdivision, because it took 3 lots, whatever, 250, 300, 400, 500 feet, are adjacent to Nix Road, all 30 lots or whatever it is, would have to be 3 acres. Or just the ones that are physically adjacent to the gravel road.
I mean, as
That's a
of
good-
the 19th, so if there were 3 lots, and if they had frontage on no frontage on gravel road, they could have the 1 acre. But let's say if it was a corner lot of those, that would have
Well,
to
you're
be
familiar
all
with the
3
Nix Road
acres.
project, aren't you?
Right, yeah.
So aren't 2 or 3 lots that in
Yes.
between Freemanville and is it Roy Blackwell's house?
Correct.
Aren't there a couple or 3 lots in there
Correct. I think there were 3 lots.
that are 1+ acres?
Correct.
Now, not 3 acres. Would those 3 lots have to only be 3 acres now? Obviously you can't fit 3. Maybe it would be 1.
That was my interpretation, understanding that would be the implication.
Those that
it
are,
would be
that are-
those 3
that are
lots that had the
physically
adjacency
adjacent
to it.
Not the entirety of that development.
And unless something changed between the last conversation we had and something at Planning Commission, that was my understanding, is that it would apply to the lots
ones that
that
are
are
physically-
adjacent. What this was designed to do is designed to
Protect the gravel
the
roads.
dual frontage issue that we had. We had an issue between the subdivision code and the zoning, and they weren't completely aligned. This was bringing that into alignment. So this way you couldn't create the double frontage with a little stem. As I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. So you would end up with the frontage on the paved road when in actuality it's adjacent to a gravel road.
So
I'm very confused by this myself
similar,
now.
what I think you're getting at, and I think we all may be thinking of, is if there's a parcel that's similarly situated to the Nix Road, Freemanville Road, that maybe, let's just use that 50 acres, and you could get 35 1-acre lots. Those 3 1-acre lots that touch Nix Road would become 1 3-acre lot, and the rest of them could be 1-acre lots.
As long as there was no adjacency to any gravel roads, that was my understanding of this. Did something change?
Not that the whole shooting match would have to be 3 acres. I
No,
think we would
just
love that, but
adjacent.
I think that's been
Just
too
adjacent to
heavy-handed.
Nix.
Okay, because that's where it goes back
Yes.
to mine.
No, I
No.
disagree.
No.
No,
Okay.
no, that's not
She's
how
saying
it's
the-
written.
Because I know when the Colonnade at White Columns was built, they actually back up, some of those lots back up to Nix Road. So are we saying because a couple of those lots back up to Nix Road, the whole White Colonnade would have had to have been 3-acre lots, even though it had no access at all to Nix Road?
Correct.
but
Yes.
it was coming off.
That's the way this
That's the way-
was written, is that if you've got.
that gonna be considered
piece of
a
a parcel
taking?
touching a gravel road, the entire parcel, 50 acres, 35, whatever it
Yeah, because
is.
that goes back to my question earlier on the answer, because that's,
Yes.
you know, if we real quick go back in history, the reason, and, you know, sometimes as we move through time and, you know, this is what people talk about and all, I think everybody thinks that the whole 3 acre and a gravel road was meant for less density. But in reality, that was all done in the past just because of the infrastructure and wear and tear on the gravel road. If it was adjacent to a paved road, then the county's fine, you know, put as much as you want in there. They wanted development. So now we're going back and redoing that so that, you know, we're actually looking at less density and have a gravel road be you know, to help with that. But I do see a problem, you know, if we're looking at, say, a 100 acre parcel and just one side of it's on gravel, does that mean every lot that touches the gravel road is a 3 acre lot? Or you're going all the way to the 100 acres and everything, and that has to be a 3 acre lot?
Yeah, and that, I guess that, I thought the intent when we were looking at this was, if we use the example that we recently dealt with Ebenezer Road and Sweet Apple, let's say that was one whole thing. I thought the idea was to protect on Sweet Apple that anything that abuts Sweet Apple, those could be no less than 3 acre lots. But once you got interior, if it came off from Ebenezer, if that was one whole plat, you could still do 1 acre lots. But then you're protecting still the gravel road. That's what I thought the direction we were going, not saying just if it touches it, it makes the whole parcel.
Yes.
Well, then what needs to happen here is the council needs to tell staff exactly what this, because that's, everything y'all are saying is not what this reads like
Okay.
right now.
And I, you know, again, I'd love for it to touch it, you know, everything, but at some point you get, if you're just touching a gravel road, it would stretch everywhere. So, I mean, I did hear taking, and Ken, you said no, but I would think we would, at some point, you know, get some legal challenges if we get too much on that, other than just the lots adjacent to gravel road. So the key, as Ken, you're saying, we need to direct staff, though, I think the key is council needs to decide what was the intent.
Right.
Well, you know, what were we looking for?
'Cause it doesn't look like the text matches your intent. That's the purpose.
But,
Yeah.
Unless we clarify the intent.
My intent was that little scratch. Is that what it reads? Then
No.
No.
And that was the understanding of originally where we were going. Did something happen at Planning Commission
Well,
that changed
so
this?
Can I can explain. I proposed at CZIM, came up with a proposal of a text amendment. The community came to me and said, we don't want it that way. We would like to see it. It was very similar to what you just outlined with the, you know, if it abuts a gravel and then if it abuts the portion of a paved road, then it's 1 acre. So between the CZIM and the Planning Commission, the input from the community and also the input from the Planning Commission was to recommend the verbiage as you see in front of you. Obviously, you don't have to do it that way, but up to this point, that's what's been the input from the community and from the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So,
Let me ask you this, Robin.
It's formidable.
When you say community, and again, like I said, I'll be real clear, I'd love to, you know, we had minimum of 5 acre lots or whatever, 10 acre lots, but, you know, I'd only want people that own 5 or 10 acres to be able to make that decision. It's not fair for people on 1.5 acre, but when you say the community came out, you know, obviously it's real easy to come out if you live in a 1 acre neighborhood and say, you know, we only want 3 acre lots from now on, but the community, were there people that were landowners too on that?
I mean, at one point, Scott Reese was at one of the Planning Commission meetings and expressed his concern over it, but the majority of the people were still asking us to look at it the way that it's presented to you, and then ultimately through the discussion at the Planning Commission and the deliberation, and they kind of tossed it around, and they came to a conclusion, like I outlined in the memo, is that they recommended 6-0 for this verbiage. So we're just presenting to you what's come through the pike so far.
I think the key, though, is for the council to figure out what was it the council's intention or thoughts were on this, and, you know, make sure we're not at a big difference between the
I thought our original intention and thought was to make sure that if any lots adjacent and whichever side it was to a gravel road were a minimum of 3 acres, and that there was, whereas in the previously, Fulton County's policy was it depended on where you had access. So if the access was from a gravel road, it had 3 acres. If the access was from a paved road, it had 1 acre. That was always Fulton County's board policy as far as the way it was. And I know that's not been the board policy that has been here lately, but that was Fulton County's board policy. And I thought that's what we were trying to make sure we had done. Yeah, to capture that, to make sure that we always had 3 acres on gravel roads, and that if you were, there was no way that somebody could subdivide a property and take off 10 feet of the road and to avoid being on the gravel road. But yet, I'm not sure that it was our intent to make a 100-acre parcel that had 100 feet of it adjacent to a gravel road to all suddenly now have to be 3-acre lots.
Unless they made the access to that subdivision coming off from the gravel road.
Right, yeah.
Well, then, has the council's intention then not been satisfied by E1 and 2? Is the only sort of fly in the ointment then 3? Because 1 and 2 deal with the I mean, it sounds to me like you've hit your double frontage lots, or what we're calling adjacency. It sounds
Yeah,
like
I mean, if I think
3 is the only one that's kind of causing the unanticipated consequence.
I think that the intent is fairly clear that if it touches, you can use adjacent or whatever, but if it touches a gravel road, it would be a 3-acre lot.
You've done that in 1 and you've done that in 2.
Now, again, I'm not saying I wouldn't love for everything to be 3-acre lots from now on out, but I don't know that that's practical. What's council's thoughts or direction on this?
I kind of agree with Karen. I think we would all love for them all to be 3 acres,
yeah.
but I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think that if they're adjacent, and that means any of the 4 sides, anything that touches a gravel road needs to be 3 acres. Anything that's interior to this potential new development or whatever that doesn't front a gravel road or touch or rear or side.
Or even if it doesn't front, or any access to it.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Or access.
I think that's the idea, because let's say that your access, you're coming off from the gravel road, that subdivision, all lots would have to be minimum of 3 acres.
Right.
But if you just had three lots on that gravel road, and then there was the bulk of the property backed up to the tarred road or the paved road, then that would be the access. Someone could actually do 1-acre lots, but you're still protecting the people that live on the gravel road by maintaining a minimum of 3 acres in the way that would be developed.
So whenever there's a conflict or there's ambiguity because both are available, we side in favor of the gravel road. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think there'd be any conflict with this.
I think
There would be
it
no
says that they
conflict.
touch the gravel road.
No, okay.
If it touches
So
the gravel road,
Let's just imagine the
That's your
subdivision
access.
for a second that has 2 entrances, or 1 entrance and 1 exit. One's from a gravel road, one's from a paved road.
I don't think you
wouldn't
allow
allow
it to
it.
have
You wouldn't
an
allow it.
entrance from a gravel road, or else they have to,
Maybe it should be all
they have
3
to,
acres.
yeah,
Everything
they
that's
have
on
to
the
go to the
gravel
3 acre. They just have to have it
That's
just
one way to
from
do
the
it.
That's what I'm
paved
saying.
road.
I got a question. Looking at the list of lots that are on unpaved roads,
We have a couple
some of them,
less than
a lot
3.
of them are less than 3 acres as it sits now.
They're grandfathered.
So
Those
they
are
would be able to be
grandfathered
build on that with no changes
Okay,
to it or
that was
anything
my
like that.
question
Now, if they
for you.
changed them or combined them or this, that, or the other, then they would fall under the new deal.
If they're less than 3 acres already, then they get.
be non-conforming, correct?
Right, correct.
Non-conforming but protected.
There's a bunch of them on Land Road, there's a bunch of 1 acres on Land Road, and that's a gravel. It's just kind of out there in the country kind of thing, so that does exist.
And this 1 and 2, Ken, E 1 and 2, access or has access to an unpaved road. So
Do
that
we
would-
need to
that would-
add something about the fact that you can't have a paved subdivision coming off of a gravel road and not have to comply? Because I think that's important too, because
Although those lots would be adjacent to.
Well,
Not necessarily.
two of them may be.
Yeah.
The front.
I mean, you could put in a huge subdivision off of a gravel road and pave the subdivision, but
I would say the public works doesn't allow that, even at this point. There's,
But I want to make sure that
yeah,
that's.
we want to make sure that's
we can
not-
ask
Yeah.
about that.
We'll definitely include that, but there is something, there's something under, I forgot what, is it 48 that prohibits that? But we'll whatever it is, we'll make sure we incorporate it.
Obviously, I think we have a difference in what maybe the intention or thoughts were versus what's come before us. So if staff could work on that.
We
before
will.
bringing
Consider it done.
Okay. All right, anything else on this? Okay. Sudi, do we have public comment on our next item?
We do not, sir.
Okay, would you please call our next item?
Discussion of RZ 1608 to amend the definitions regarding paved and unpaved roads in Chapter 64, Article 1, and Section 64.1, definitions. Ms. Kathy Field.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a proposal to change the definitions. We have, the Community Development Department recommends approval of this text amendment, and I will tell you that this went to the Planning Commission both in October, and then it was deferred to November. And then after discussion by the Planning Commission, they recommended 6-0 of the amendment to the definition section, except that they added within the definition of gravel road to include the list of unpaved roads as listed below. In addition, they recommended that in the definition of unpaved road to add the list of unpaved roads as part of the definition, and also include the map in the definition as well, which is what we did. And as I mentioned to you, there's a little inconsistency between the list and the map, and we are working to correct that. So in essence, we have modified the definition of gravel road to some extent, and then created a new definition of unpaved road as well, so that it leaves no ambiguity in terms of what we mean by those two definitions.
Any questions for Kathy? Anybody?
Fix the map, and I'm okay with it.
Okay. All right, you guys will adjust the map and
Yes.
make sure we're good on that. I don't hear anything else, so. Sudi, if we could move to our next item, do we have any public comment?
We do not on the next one, and it is discussion regarding amending Chapter 50, Article 3, Division 1, Section 5071, compliance with city procedures and guidelines required, paved and unpaved roads. Ms. Kathy Field.
Yes, thank you. The department also recommends approval of this proposed text amendment, and this is an amendment to bring into consistency in Chapter 50, which is our subdivision ordinance, the proposed text amendment that we are proposing in 64, which is our zoning ordinance, so as to make them both compatible and similar. So, in essence, we have made the changes in terms of the gravel roads with the combined frontages on an unpaved and paved road, and we may have to look at this language again based on the conversation here. I just want to make sure indeed that we've captured it accurately, and we will certainly do that.
Okay. Any comments on that or questions? All right, thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
Okay, Sudi, do we have any public comment on our next item?
Yes, we do, sir.
Okay.
There's one public comment from Ms. Laura Bentley.
Hey there, Laura Bentley, 2500 Bethany Church Road. I'm speaking in support of amending the Deerfield form-based code. I'd like for you to carefully consider the best utilization for our Highway 9 corridor. We have limited commercial capacity, a booming population that's going to need goods and services, limited commercial revenue, and if our residential goes into our commercial area on 9, then we will have to probably put pressure to put commercial into our residential areas. I want to circulate this. This was in a packet from an earlier, the Planning Commission packet, and it is, it shows the, oh, they do? Okay, great. I didn't see it in the packet, sorry. So it shows, I counted all the acreage, 59 acres, give or take 5 acres. So 59 acres of available potentially commercial acreage. And so it's going to be very profitable for it to become residential in a haphazard way. So I'd like for you to consider what's best for Milton. I also submitted in a letter to you a drawing of one of these. This is a high-density residential neighborhood off of Highway 9. It's 2 acres with 18 townhomes on a stub street. And this is, I'd like to submit that if possible. I don't know if they have that, but I don't know if that's our idea of creating a community. Finally, after speaking with our city architect about the high standards that he holds what commercial buildings look and feel, the look and feel of them, for example, the Del Taco, he showed me some nice drawings of a storage facility in which he said people come and rent space to store wine, and they look beautiful, these storage facilities. So I guess my point is maybe you can have a discussion tonight about the best, I know that we're limited with the form-based code and allowing these high-density residential uses, but maybe we need to continue that moratorium and debate this and think about the best thing for our commercial base, our infrastructure strain, schools, parks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Sue?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The department recommendation in regarding this consideration to amend the Deerfield Form-Based Code is as follows. The Deerfield Form-Based Code was adopted based on the Highway 9 Livable Centers Initiative, our LCI plan, which was approved in 2012, as well as the Highway 9 North Visioning Study that was approved in 2014. The proposed text amendment would change what the community agreed upon at that time regarding the type of uses permitted in each transect zone. Staff therefore recommends that if the mayor and city council would prefer to amend the Deerfield Form-Based Code as proposed in order to provide additional commercial tax space, that a comprehensive review of the plan be initiated in order to allow for a thorough analysis of the proposed changes. By way of background, the purpose of this text amendment is to consider eliminating all residential uses except when located in a vertically mixed-use building for properties adjacent to Highway 9 and North Main Street. The text amendment was heard at the October 26th Planning Commission meeting, and that was deferred till the November 16th meeting. And at that time, the Planning Commission, after discussing the history of the Highway 9 North Visioning Plan, as well as the Michael Elliott report, they voted to deny the proposed text amendment to eliminate residential uses. This decision was based upon the extensive work by staff, Dr. Elliott, and the stakeholders involved to come to an agreement that was ultimately approved by the Mayor and Council via the Deerfield Form-Based Code as it is currently written. And certainly available to answer any questions.
Okay. Do you have any questions or comments
And
on
I
that?
do have, we do have some slides showing, and I think that you've got them, but
Those
they
are
are
our
slides showing along Highway 9 how many acres are available that could be converted to just a commercial use, should you decide to go in that direction. But you can see
Okay, Bert?
So Kathy, a couple of years ago, or however long, we got together with I guess the city and the folks in the 5-acre neighborhood and hammered out what would be acceptable for both parties for the parcels, and remind me how many acres they may be on either side of the entrance of the 5-acre neighborhood?
There are 2 4-acre parcels on either side, so there's 4 parcels together with 8 acres total.
And with this, would
So
those 2
16
have
acres.
to be included in anything with this? I mean, obviously, we came up with a, not a hard-fought, but a hard-fought agreement with those folks to what would be acceptable for them. Could those 2 be notched out and nothing change with those, and some things change with all the others? Is that an issue?
Sure, you can separate them out, because with our moratorium, if we remembered, we did the moratorium without including the 5 acres, and then we went back and included the 5 acres as well. So you can certainly look to the whole corridor and exempt the 5-acre agreement if you wanted to, or not. It's certainly optional.
To add to Bert's question, was it only the 5-acre parcels that were involved in this decision, in this group and agreement, or was it the entire corridor?
The agreement was within the 5-acre area. Although with the entire corridor, we did have a public planning study, and both for the area south of from Bethany Bend south, and then the area from Bethany Bend north, that was a visioning study, and in that visioning study we did include residential uses. In addition, the 5-acre agreement also included those residential uses as well.
Okay, Rick?
So I guess when I'm reading through and I'm looking at the more recent meetings, you're saying that there were people from 5 acres that came forward and said they wanted to still allow a form of residential use on that property.
Yes.
But did they designate what that was? I mean, originally I know they wanted it to be homes like their homes, but under the form-based code, those could be townhomes.
That is
could
correct.
be anything.
That is correct.
Along
That is
Highway
correct.
9, which was what we were trying to.
Right.
Do they understand that they could actually have townhomes along the front there?
They were allowed uses. We did talk about the list of allowed uses. The uses allowed in the 5-acre area is a lot less than the uses allowed in the rest of the corridor. But residential was included in that whole agreement, and from that agreement is what we based the form-based code on.
And what they're saying is they still want to have the broad-based ability to have, even including townhomes, residential on those parcels.
Yes, and I think they felt very strongly that they had come to the agreement that they had, and they didn't want to break it.
So that surprises me, because I've heard the opposite when I've talked to a number of residents from there, stating strongly that if they could have similar single-family housing as what they have in 5 acres, that's what they originally wanted, and then it was deemed it could be commercial or high density. They didn't want to have the high density housing.
I think the issue there, though, is not only the neighbors, but the property owners had come to an agreement, prior. So you're basically taking away that agreement if you change it. Karen?
We may need, because we had a prior agreement that we had a lot of studies done on for 5 acres, we need to look at it separately. The rest of the Highway 9 corridor, though, I mean, we have such little commercial and office
We can't afford to.
in the city. I really hate to see, and to me, I'd much rather have a nice office building than a whole bunch of townhomes. So
Right.
if we're gonna have to allow some kind of residential, I think the density ought to be a whole lot less than what it would be if it was developed as commercial or office. Because I believe that this has gotta be our quarter to put that kind of stuff in. And if we don't have places for it to go, eventually, they're gonna start asking for it to go other places, and we don't want it other places.
I would agree with, I mean, I think we either need to renegotiate with the 5-acre parcel, or leave it as it parcels, or leave it as it is, which I would do, is leave it as it is, because it wasn't long ago that we came up with this agreement, and implement this for the remaining 51 plus or minus acres, if it's a total of 59.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Anybody else? The only concern I have, if you look at all those parcels, when you talk about commercial, there's pretty much the majority of all those parcels about right up to single-family residence. So there's no buffer, changing from uses. It's not a, residential, then a multi, townhome, and then commercial. It's budding commercial up, so you may get some more unintended consequences with that.
Aren't there certain setbacks?
Yeah.
I
Well,
thought
there's setbacks, but I'm just saying people may not understand, whether it's 10 foot or 25 or 30 foot setback, they may not want to look in the back of a store or an office building or whatever. So just kind of warn them, be prepared.
Well, another thing is that we have a lot more say-so over the architecture of a commercial or an office building than we do over the architecture of a residence. So I would rather have the city architect helping decide what needs to go there rather than just townhomes put there.
Okay, sounds like council's okay with leaving the 5-acre parcel of agreement alone, and then the balance, sticking with commercial.
Very good.
Residential.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Okay, Sudi, I think we go back to item number 1. Do we have any public comment?
number 2.
Okay, I'm sorry, number 2. Do we have any public comment?
We do not, sir.
Okay, if you'll call that item.
Discussion regarding draft list of city charter areas to be reviewed by Charter Commission for consideration of a final list to be approved at the January 9th, 2017 council meeting. Mr. Steve Crocow.
Last week we discussed the charter changes that we were going to propose coming before you. I have it split up a little bit between our different areas of expertise. I'm going to turn it first over to Ken, I believe. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so the first language is some proposed modifications with respect to our charter to simply further nail down the city's availability and flexibility with respect to both the procurement and holding of not only conservation properties, but even lesser interest in conservation properties. Obviously, this is sort of getting all of our ducks in a row as we begin to embark on what could be a very lengthy process, hopefully a flexible process of procurement and expenditure of your successful GO bond. So this was actually a recommendation from your bond council. I think this, forgive me, I think this is, to say it is prophylactic, I think that it is. It's very precautionary. I'm not exactly sure that we need to do it, but however, Roger's a good lawyer, and I respect his thoughts on this, and so I do agree that this is probably something we ought to go ahead and do. Although I will tell you I'm very comfortable with the city's inherent power to hold these property interests anyway. If this makes him sleep better or not, I'm certainly willing to recommend it to you. So that's where that first language comes from.
Okay, and all of these are just some recommendations that will go to the commission. And again, I got to remember going back. Do we ultimately, does that come back to the council for a vote? I can't remember. We did 5 years ago.
It did last time. So they
Okay.
made a formal recommendation, and then you all sort of
Right.
acknowledged the recommendation and sent it to the local delegation.
Okay, so if anybody has an issue with these.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
all right. Next one.
It's also Ken.
Ken,
Right.
you're up.
And again, I'm embracing the iPad here. So this is a section, candidly, this is something that staff had recommended, and I agree with. It's simply providing some delegation with respect to contract signing authority to the city manager for contracts with a maximum amount of $50,000 with a term of no more than a single fiscal year. Again, the charter is everything. The charter is your baseline document. We obviously try to handle all of the day-to-day administrative decisions, not only in conformance with the state law, but also with respect to your city charter. And this would provide just a little bit of additional flexibility with respect to not having to corral the mayor every time we want a contract to be executed, would allow that authority to be delegated. The expectation would be that would be delegated on a case-by-case or contract-by-contract basis, but it certainly would probably expedite the functionings of the city. And I believe it is very appropriate that the charter be modified to allow that specific delegation of power. That's how that would happen.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Would this mean that we wouldn't have all these little $1,000, $2,000 things on our consent agenda?
No.
Where they'd still have to come before us on the consent
You
agenda?
would probably continue to ratify all of these agreements. We would probably continue, particularly with respect to those sorts of contracts, put in there in the consent agenda language that the execution authority is delegated to the city manager, and therefore you wouldn't see them again, though. It would expedite the business of the city, but no, they will still probably
They
show
still
up.
have to,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way that they don't have to come before us? If they've already been signed, they don't have to come before us if there's something that's already a budgeted item?
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I get that question a lot, not from the city, but when I'm otherwise talking about these sorts of matters. I think it is a best practice. I would still recommend that you have those on your agenda, even if it's just for a consent agenda. I just think that
I mean, to me, it just seems kind of ridiculous for us to approve a contract that's already been signed.
yeah, I
I
understand.
mean, it's already been signed, it's already in place. There's nothing we can do about it. What happens if we said we weren't going to approve it? I
Yeah,
mean,
but that's a little. Commissioner Longoria, I knew I could see the eyes. I could just see that right there. That is a little different, though. I mean, I think that those are situations, first of all, where you could put an end to that practice immediately. That's not a product of state law. You could say, no more. We want to see every contract on the consent agenda before it's executed, and I would amen that. That's perfectly fine. Those are situations where, obviously, we're watching, we're taking our lead from the council. If you ever begin to question that practice at all, it would be discontinued. Obviously, you know why that's being done, very utilitarian, just to speed up. This is in further advancement of that. But your point's well taken, but I still recommend we do those. Your point makes sense to me, but I still recommend it.
Okay. Anybody else? Joe? Look. All right. See, we'll move on.
Carter's our
Carter.
next one.
The other two changes we were talking about were related to providing, bringing us into the 21st century to allow for electronic voting during council sessions as opposed to just voice voting, and then allowing for digital documentation of our codes versus just the hard copy book that Sudi keeps. So that was it, very simple.
Yeah, that's an issue with that. Anybody else? Okay, Carter, I think you got the next one.
I had a couple others, but I think Ken went over one regarding the contracts. And then the last one regarding the homestead exemption was a placeholder, and Stacy says that we have taken care of that. So that was some discussion that we had previously 6 or 8 months ago regarding the homestead exemption. I just wanted to make sure that we had captured it in this, and Stacy says we have with some previous modifications.
Okay.
Our next one is Kathy. I believe you're up. Is Kathy not here?
Stepped out. Let's see.
Sudi? Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I do. This one, it states in 322 that one of the duties of the mayor is that he has the authority to appoint city council committees and council members to oversee and report on the functions of the various departments of the city, subject to confirmation by the city council. I did find in the charter direct conflict in section 3.22b8, which says, except for the purpose of inquiries and investigations, the city council and its members shall deal with city officers and employees who are subject to the direction and supervision of the city manager solely through the city manager. And then it just goes on. Neither the city nor its members shall give orders to any such officer or employee. So the removal of section 3.22b8 was the recommendation.
Okay. Any comments on that? Joe?
Was there any history as why that was there? And if has that been addressed? In other words, are we saying we no longer need that? Is that?
I don't think it's ever been addressed. We have not, gone in that direction since, as far as appointing the committees and
Because that's
council
not
committees, so.
unusual. That's not unusual to try to put isolation
Right.
between a board and the company that the board manages. So I don't necessarily see that as being unusual.
Mhm.
So I just want to know, are we removing it because we've outgrown it?
I think, Alpharetta does that, right? Alpharetta uses the section that they're talking about, and so in order to, like when I worked with Jimmy Gelvin in the Parks and Rec deal, he was the councilman overseeing that, and so that was where the negotiation happened. Kind of like how you guys appointed me to be the one to help negotiate with Alpharetta on that a while back. So it just gives us basically a directive to oversee different assets in the city, which may be beneficial as we grow. That's just something that the commission will have to decide.
So the recommendation is to remove that section.
Right.
I get that.
Right.
That's why I'm asking the question.
I don't think the city of Milton's ever put together, though,
We haven't in the
a
past.
city council committee.
We haven't.
We have
in
not.
the past, no.
We have not.
So we're,
This
about,
gives us the ability to.
Right.
That's
because you're taking the conflict out of that. Okay. Next, Bernadette here.
I actually have that one.
Yep.
That was mostly my words on it, actually. So in our charter, it states that we should have the same bill date and due date for our property taxes as Fulton County. And I believe the initial intention was that Fulton County was going to bill our taxes for us, but we have never chosen to do that. We bill our own property taxes. And since we get the tax digest after Fulton County bills, we've never been able to meet that, obviously. So the recommendation is to remove that section altogether. If you look at other charters, they do not have that section in there. Sudie, you've got the next one.
And the next one, we're coming into the recent century here with codification of ordinances. So we're talking about Municode electronically, and then also those big, huge Municode books that I think all the council, only 3 council members have those books now and use paper to supplement them. Everybody else is electronically. And I have the staff has only 6 members that are using the big books, me being one of them, of course. City clerks love paper. So this section, it changes shall be available. The section says shall be furnished. We're changing it that the code shall be available, just meaning that city clerk doesn't have to go around, give these books out to all staff, you guys, and all the supplements. I think we're up to supplement 25 since I've worked here. So that just brings us up. And then the next one, the code talks about establishing a price for a reasonable price fixed by the elected officials for the purchase by the public of this Municode. And it is available free online. So we're just changing the section that it is available to the public free online. So it's just those 2 areas.
Okay, any comments, Bert?
comment. Sudie, I'm one of those 3 people. Apparently I didn't realize it was 7, so you can just scratch me off the list.
I've already turned mine back
Anybody
in.
else?
I didn't want them.
I couldn't figure out how to put the leaflets in there anyway. So.
Any other dinosaurs up here? Besides myself?
Call us
All
out,
right.
Sudie, if we're a dinosaur. Let us know.
You can self-identify. Don't call anybody out.
Down to 2. I turned mine back in.
But see, I'm going to be prepared when the all internet and everything goes
When
out.
it goes out.
You guys can't eat or breathe.
I'm good with that.
All right, next. Stacy?
Yeah, I have the next several, and it's more housekeeping than anything. So the next section talks about the annual salary of the mayor and council shall be and such. It talks about how it should be funded to you in monthly installments. I'm just changing that to bi-weekly to match our practices because that's when payroll runs. So that's the suggestion there.
You mean twice a month? Or
No,
is
we
it
get
bi-weekly?
bi-weekly.
Every other
Every
week.
other week.
Every
so-
other Friday.
Right now, it's just twice a month.
Twice a month.
No, it's every other week.
Friday. I get my little email
I
telling
need to pay
me.
closer attention to that whole, gig, so, all right.
It's
Okay.
every other week.
It's every other week now.
Mhm.
And this is just clarifying, just to
It's just
codify.
changing it to match the practice.
Okay.
The next
It's not
one,
changing, Joe. You won't post that the same.
My knowledge is catching up with reality.
Okay. All right, Sudie, what's the next one?
it's actually me again. The
I mean,
next
I'm
section
sorry,
is.
did I say Sudie? I meant Stacy.
Next section is just clearing up the word, changing the word repair to repaid. If you read it, it says that the last section authorize the borrowing of money except for loan to be repaid within 30 days and not repair within 30 days.
Okay.
Next section talks about how the mayor may submit amendments to the capital improvements budget, and this is already spelled out as a city manager responsibility, so it's just changing that to city manager, or is it removing that section? I can't remember what I said there. Anyway, you can read it. The next section deals with purchasing, it just says specifically that the city will have a centralized purchasing system. We are asking to remove this section because we try to have our policies or our purchasing policies matched and be a little more flexible to match the needs of the city. And other charters don't have this in their charter. I mean, other cities' charters do not have that particular language in there, so I'm just asking to remove that and let the ordinances dictate that.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Makes sense. All right, Sarah's still here.
Come on up, Sarah.
Come on, Sarah.
You
Come up
waited-
here and
you
give
waited the whole-
your 2
whole
words.
I just ask that cultural or public art be included somewhere in the charter. That's the only complaint I've had about the creation of our cultural art committee, is that it's not in our charter for the city to perform that function.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's all we have.
I think that is all we have. Anything from the council?
Breakfast was great.
Yeah, always
Oh, it was
is.
great.
Always is.
This is great.
Yes.
Uh,
My dogs had a wonderful time at the pancake breakfast
That's good.
and their visit to Santa.
All right, then we'll conclude this meeting. Thank you for being here.